Well, joining me now is somebody I've known personally and professionally a long time, a couple decades together in and around the Atlantic. It's James Bennet. He is currently the Lexington, a senior editor at The Economist. He writes the Lexington column, basically what the hell, the column that tells the rest of the English-speaking world what the hell is going on in America. Perhaps, or at least that's the North Star. That's the job. Is that fair?
That's the aspiration. Yeah, it's great to see you, Chuck, and really nice to be with you.
It's good to see you. I want to talk more about what's happening, but and then in sort of the role of America and what's happening around the world. But at some point, I want to talk about how we all consume information, since you've been in so many parts of that debate as well, both at the New York Times, at the Atlantic, and then some. But look, this is a week where we saw. We're taping here. This is going to hit on Monday. We're taping on a Thursday. We've had the big, essentially the meeting of global leaders that happens every September. And I guess the most striking thing is just how much of while the meeting took place in the United States, the president of the United States was the guy on the outside looking in, was he not?
Yeah. He and very much presenting himself that way, right? Mm-hmm. Lecturing all the rest of the world on everything that they're doing wrong, and attacking the United Nations itself as a failing institution, which is the approach he's taken to a lot of institutions in the U.S. And as usual, he's not wrong in his critique in every respect. And it's hard to make the case that the UN has covered itself in glory in recent years in terms of solving global conflicts. As always, he pushed it pretty far and didn't necessarily offer a very clear alternative that seemed constructive.
He came across in ways we've seen other sort of leaders who are trying to be outsiders, who are trying to go against the establishment. And yet, as anti-establishment as he sounded, I mean, the UN can't function without the United States. Most of these countries sort of are tied in to the United States in one way or the other. So while, I think back to like Hugo Chavez giving a crazy speech, or the president of Iran, right? And I'm not trying to say that Trump is like Hugo Chavez, but he's behaving the way a Hugo Chavez did, like seeing conspiracy and just attacking everybody around him and not believing there's anybody worth working with and all of that. But, I got these messages. Europe is still going, what the hell is going on here? And they still can't seem to figure it out. And my answer is, man, we're still trying to figure it out too. To those Europeans. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, and there's a lot of muscle memory in that institution and in a lot of the states in that institution to look to the U.S. for leadership. As you said, we were instrumental in the creation of the United Nations and have been the indispensable state in terms of maintaining what was understood to be the post-war order. And Donald Trump doesn't have a lot of patience for any of that stuff. Right. He's a bilateralist, not a multilateralist, and he's very concerned, obviously with national interest as he perceives it. He confuses everybody because people think he's an isolationist. He's not an isolationist. I don't know if you feel like he's the most interventionist president of my lifetime.
He has no ideology other than transactional. Right. Everything is it's just I look at it. He's what's another? It's not isolationist and it's not internationalist. It really is sort of a Trumpalist. I don't know, meaning it's always about him. Right. If he can get enriched, or why is he intervening in Argentina? Because he's a political ally. Why does he care about free speech in Europe in one moment, but doesn't care about a country's acting unilaterally in Brazil? Right. It's all through the prism of him.
Yeah, I mean, a slightly more generous way to put that would be it's through what he perceives to be the national interest. But for him, there's no separation between the Trump interest and the national interest. So if you're a friend of Donald Trump's, if you're Javier Milei in Argentina, he will rush to your rescue. Right. If you're Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, he'll turn around and say, I respect sovereignty, I'm against intervention, blah, blah, blah. Right. But you, Brazil, Brazilian and impose tariffs on you because I don't like what your justice system is doing to my buddy. So is that in the American national interest? I don't really understand how that is, but I think that's the story he tells himself and that his followers accept.
One of the things that I find when I think about sort of where both you and I have lived professionally, a lot of those institutions, the Atlantic, the Times, NBC, the Economist, there's this, what are we seeing? Should we be sounding an alarm about the law losing the democracy, or should we be less alarmist and more focused on the fact that the public doesn't like what's being sold right now by the leader, right? Like you sort of see, like, I think sometimes we underestimate the voter in all of our hand wringing about what Trump is doing in the moment. Like, I think there's I can't tell you how many people say to me, well, you keep saying that the voter will eventually get it right, but he's going to cancel elections. And so we're not going to be able to do this. Where are you on that scale of totally alarmed being 10, totally blasé being 0?
I think it's the hardest thing for us as journalists, right, in the Trump era, is calibrating that. Because you don't want to be hysterical. You don't want to be hysterical, period. It's just not terribly constructive.
Well, there's some news organizations out there that have been at to do the Spinal Tap thing that are at 11 all the time.
Yeah.
My friends at the Bulwark, God bless them. Man, every single day, this is the end, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, is anybody listening?
Yeah. And they do a lot of good work.
Yes,
and there's also been a very good business in being either a total alarmist about Donald Trump or being totally against Donald Trump. And the number of journalism organizations that have managed to keep their poise and not be led down one path or the other is diminishing by the day. But some of that reflects reality in that, like, the last couple of weeks, Chuck, have worried me a lot. Things got pretty dark. Again, like with Donald Trump, it's so hard to tell what. I actually wrote about this week. I'm really worried about the way Trump is changing the incentives of our politics right now, the prosecutions. The more we see this turning political opponents into enemies, and they'll claim the Democrats struck first, whatever. What he's doing is without precedent now for an American president in the Nixon era. The stakes become existential for holding on to power for everybody in Donald Trump's government, right? They're going to be now at risk of prosecution if a Democrat comes in. There's no way not to think that's a possibility. And so these stakes that have been rising for years now for hyper-partisans on both sides feel to me like they're reaching a level that is really dangerous to the democracy. And so it just concerns me a lot. There's a long-winded answer to your question that, I think there's a non-hysterical way to try to take people by the lapels and say this is a really, really bad idea.
Well, like I throw myself into reform, right? Like it's clear that if Trump got elected president, our system was breaking anyway, right? Like if the system had been functional, Donald Trump doesn't become president. So I do think, the rational way to address this is saying, okay, what is wrong with our institutions that are not working? Let's take the justice system. The fact is, in the current way we conduct politics, you can't have the attorney general be a direct political appointee of the president. I think that's just, I actually think we need to figure out a different way. Maybe it's like the Federal Reserve, but a different way that there is a little distance between where the president certainly nominates, but that doesn't necessarily fire at any one time. And we've got to create a system that maybe staggers when different terms of the FBI, deputy AGs, because what we're doing, if we already had half the country, right? Donald Trump spent 5 years convincing half the country the justice system was rigged. Now he's rigging the justice system. That will in turn tell the other half, well, now it's rigged. Okay. Doesn't matter when you believed it got rigged. Now we've got 100% of people thinking the whole thing is rigged. And if you lose the rule of law, you lose your country.
Yeah, and you cite the Federal Reserve as the example, but of course
I
that's an
know.
institution that's now in the process before our eyes of being
Well, this
politicized.
is such an important moment. I think this is the single most important moment for the Supreme Court yet, right? We've had quite a few of them, but if they let this Lisa Cook thing go through, um, that's a change in the unitary executive. I mean, that's there's no going back um, under this without constitutional amendments to fix this.
Yeah. And what we've seen over and over again is there's a pretty strong majority on this court for the
Hmm.
idea that the executive has a lot more power than the norms of American politics have allowed a president up till now.
I think Roberts, Kavanaugh, and Barrett are going to be fascinating on this.
Well,
I think they're going to, Roberts, fairly or unfairly, it strikes me he's so determined not to have a constitutional crisis with Trump that he's always looking for a way out, right? He always postpones the confrontation. Like when he put a warning in there, he tried to tell Trump, don't do the Fed thing because we're going to treat that differently. Well, he did it anyway. We're going to see if they treat it differently. I think we know where Roberts is going, but can he bring Barrett or Kavanaugh with him? That's what we're going to find out.
yeah. Yeah, like his idol Marshall, who managed to manage his politics in a way that assured the independence of the court, but at the same time didn't piss the president off too much. I think he thinks he can navigate through this, and I hope and preserve the legitimacy and independence of court. I hope so. Whether we're going to wind up with I think we already are seeing a radical revision of what we've understood up till now to be the balance of powers, and of course with a supine Congress not choosing to exercise any of its authority. I think the view from the Supreme Court is like Congress is supposed to be a co-equal branch of government, not a bunch of White House interns. But what they're getting right now is White House interns. Back on what you said about reform, like that is the hopeful way, and to imagine kind of the constructive outcome here, which is what happened after the Watergate era,
And it also what happened after the Gilded Age. If you actually look at the two, I've been obsessed with think about when a lion's share of new constitutional amendments have happened in this country. They've really only we basically had three chunks, right? Right after the Civil War, right? When we had another chunk basically between, 1910 and 1940, and then we really haven't had any since, arguably, the 18-year-olds to vote. I think the 28th Amendment has something to do with pay raises, which is a very arcane one that's sitting there. So,
civil rights. I mean, all the environmental reforms and the.
Right, but they're not constitutional amendments.
Oh, I'm sorry, constitutional. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah.
No. That's what I mean. Yeah, and so if you look, right, if you believe we're sort of in a I look at this period and sometimes I think it's the 1880s, sometimes I think it's the 1920s. But actually, that whole era is very similar, right? From about 1880 to FDR, we had a pandemic in the middle of it that made us go crazy. We did prohibition right after the pandemic. I now understand how that happened, right? Look at how crazy we've gone after our pandemic. You're like, oh, right. Prohibition's always been one of those things. You're like, yeah. And people bring up the pandemic, but until you experience a pandemic and watch the crazy, you're like, oh, that's how prohibition happened. Okay, I get it now. So that's where I do have some hope, right? Is that we did, right? The first reform of the media happened with the muckrakers, arguably, in the early part of the 20th century. And in some ways, I think what's happening now with our current media ecosystem is we're in the middle of a resorting of it. And the muckrakers now are on YouTube.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're right. I mean, the Society of Newspaper Editors was created in, I think, 1922. And that was the first effort to really professionalize the industry. It was partly coming out of this experience of World War I and feeling like we were being manipulated day by day by the government. We're confusing our readers. And that's, one of their first principles was you need to separate news and opinion. Right. And that sort of led to what then was this kind of golden age, which may turn out, Chuck, just to be an aberration, that period, idea of journalism in America, because before that, it looked much more like what we're living with now, which is fragmentation and partisanship.
There's a reason results matter more than promises, just like there's a reason Morgan & Morgan has become America's largest injury law firm. For the last 35 years, they've recovered $25 billion for more than 500,000 clients. It includes cases where insurance companies offered next to nothing, short of shortchanging, seeing if they could get away with it. And Morgan & Morgan fought back, and they won millions. In Pennsylvania, one client was awarded $26 million. It was a staggering 40 times the amount that the insurance company originally offered. That offer, $650,000, whatever it took to sort of get away without paying. So with more than 1,000 lawyers across the country, Morgan & Morgan knows how to deliver for everyday people. So if you're injured, you're looking for a lawyer, check out forthepeople.com/Toddcast or dial pound law, pound 529 on your cell phone. And remember, all law firms are not the same. So give Morgan & Morgan a look. Their fee is free unless they win. Well, you know, one of the questions I keep asking, right? You and I we might have grown up in an outlier era.
Yeah.
Right. I think about the fall of the Berlin Wall, and I think about the Cold War. And now I look back on the Cold War and realize what a stabilizing force it was for our two parties. It kept the isolationist extremists on the right, the socialists on the left, were kept from power. By sort of I think sort of the focus on the Soviet Union, the focus on the fight for, essentially for protecting democracy. And I do wonder if I express it this way. 6 of our 7 presidential elections this century have been decided by 5 points or less.
Yeah.
We only had 5 in the entire 20th century decided by 5 points or less. But in the 19th century, it's something like 10 we had 2 periods of like 5 or 6 in a row that were decided by 5 points or less. So in some ways, our natural state in this country polarization. And the period basically from Truman to, I'd say 9/11, right? You sort of like a 10-year, from Truman to Clinton, right? Truman to the 2000 election, where we only had 2 elections decided by 5 points or less in that period of time, 68 and 67, 68, 60, and 76. Is that the outlier period of American history?
Yeah. And you know what's strange about it, Chuck? It's going to sound so stupid when I say this, but I've actually gone to political scientists to try to explain this, and I can't get a good explanation. Why is it that there's this kind of homeostatic quality, thermostatic quality, that we do remain so evenly divided? You know, why wouldn't it go to 60-40 at some point, or 70? We come back to it's split down the middle with knife's edge, and some of it is now gerrymandering and redistricting and so forth, but kind of knife's edge margins in the House, and the presidency being traded back and forth. You'd think at one point it would tip one way or the other.
Well, because it did tip. That is the way it worked during the Cold War, arguably, right? We would have these periods where, nope, Democrats wave. Nope, Republican Reagan revolution, right? That sort of thing. One theory I've had is that our two parties are too big, but we're really a 4-party country stuffed into a 2-party system because of the duopoly. And so where there's really been a ton of change is within the 2 parties. Right, the 2 parties vacillate between pragmatism and their base. Right, they go back and forth between who's in charge of their party, and then that in turn sort of has sort of driven the other party. The other party almost reacts in the same way. The more pragmatic Republicans are, the more pragmatic Democrats are, vice versa. Right, and now I do think you're seeing. I had a progressive friend of mine say to me the other day, "I'm looking for my own Trump now. I'm done trying to win from the ground up." And I went, just a big sigh. You're like, oh boy, this is exactly my fear, is that every political physics, essentially, right? Every action, you're going to get an equal and opposite reaction.
Yeah, and that's what I mean about the prosecutions now. It's like redistricting. There's just such an appetite in the Democratic Party. It's like if you talk about bipartisanship, if you talk about not responding in kind, that's considered like weak and pathetic. And there's a huge appetite for, as you say, among Democrats for their own version of Trump. I think you're so right about the fall of the Berlin Wall. It's like the great crack up and I don't think I certainly didn't appreciate it at the time that the 90s were this sort of wonderful time of innocence.
That was literally, there's our halcyon days were the 90s. Who knew?
But you think in the
Bill
wake
Clinton's
of the fall,
underwear, right? Like
but
that.
you get in that election in 92, you get Ross Perot,
Yep.
and you get Pat
Buchanan.
Buchanan. Right. And there are these two strains that have become dominant, in our politics. And it took some time. And then I think Donald Trump's recognition in some ways that all these institutions were a lot more fragile than they seemed. And, the tremendous dissatisfaction in the country. Like we've had wrong track numbers for basically this whole century, right? So far, people have felt the government's on the wrong track. America.
Well, and it's created, and this is where I've been, obsessively studying the 19th century election patterns, because we've been voting against, we have not voted, I think in 2008 we voted for Obama, right? Every other election has been a bit more where it felt like the last voters voted against, right? They were clear what they didn't want. They weren't necessarily clear what they wanted, but they knew what they didn't want. And that really is the hallmark of those 19th century elections. Every one of them. I mean, between, we had 7 presidents in 28 years between Andrew Jackson and Abraham Lincoln. And each one of them in their own way won by promising, well, they were going to try to, this is how they were going to bring unity, and this is how they were going to do this. And, they were all, and it's very similar to what we're seeing today, just over a different issue, where each president is promising, that they're going to be able to break this gridlock, or they're going to be able to break this polarization. And, unfortunately, the question really is, are we going to get through this period? One of my favorite expressions is I'm short-term pessimistic, long-term optimistic. I'd have said the same thing in 1939 and I'd have been right. But the short term was really messy, right? But by 1946, you could be really optimistic. And the question is, do we get through this without mass violence, and only with isolated violence? And I think that's that's my sort of blunt way of putting it.
So when you look back at the progressive era, what do you see as creating the conditions for reform?
Well, back then you had a lot of movements that were sort of in place for a while, right? You had the movement to get women the right to vote. Right. That had been sort of percolating for a while. Also, the temperance movement, right? That was percolating for some time. So you had you had the muckrakers. That's the problem of what we're missing. There isn't really a big movement for reform. I'm surprised there hasn't been a bigger call for a constitutional convention, for instance. Like we arguably are due for one. But there's this weird fear on the left of one. You have more interest on it from those from people on the right than you do on the left, when arguably, if you look at the biggest grievances of the left, almost all of their grievances are only going to be solved with constitutional amendments. There are no laws that are going to solve this, when it comes to campaign money or some of the existential things that they care about. And so you're right, other than the conditions being similar, right, where you have a new economy. We were going from an agrarian to an industrial. Now we're going from industrial to this new economy. There are these 5 or 6 lords, right? Sort of, the robber barons of today. So in that sense, I think, and we don't have our Teddy Roosevelt yet, but I do think people are looking for him or her.
Yeah. The idea of honestly, it's so hard to imagine a productive constitutional convention in a country where you can't even pass legislation anymore. Like it's all one big beautiful bill because it's the only way to do it. Stuff everything into I know.
But it's funny. It's like I think one of the ways to solve this is to double the size of the House, uncap the House, which ironically was shut down in the 1920s. It was a dispute over, by the way, you want to talk about our polarization. The reason we stopped expanding the House is because they disagreed on which states should get the extra members of Congress back in 1920. They couldn't resolve it for an entire decade, so they just capped it and said, all right, we're gonna wash our hands of this in 1930. And now, now we're stuck with this system where the irony is the Senate is now more apt, is the state legislatures will decide control of the House of Representatives while the people decide the Senate, when the founders actually had it the other way around.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, because you look at sort of America through the Economist has to look at it through a little bit more of an international prism. The last time we had sort of a protectionist race, if you will, it did end up in a world war. Why aren't there more people worried about this rise of, because nationalism and protectionism is contagious, and we're already seeing it.
Yeah, and we are seeing it. And no, I mean, the Economist has been terribly worried about this for quite a while, and the Economist was founded in the middle of the 19th century to oppose tariffs in the UK. So this is particularly, a subject it's obsessed with. As a bunch of
if it wasn't for tariffs, the UK would still be an empire, right?
Well, I don't know. I think it might have caught up with them. Other issues might have caught up with them eventually, but
we wouldn't have a country without UK tariffs. So God bless them.
It's true. And the truth there is, as you know, I mean, there have tariffs we've had tariffs imposed for one reason or another. It's not nothing new under the sun in that sense. But it goes back to what we were talking about at the outset, is this idea that we're no longer living in what we understood to be the rules-based international order after that war, after World War II. And each country we're back to a kind of 19th century idea of great power struggle. And that's tremendously destabilizing, and that's where it's a little harder to be a long-term optimist because of what history has taught us about what happens when you no longer have systems that are capable of because people recognize that this sort of order served everybody better. And a trading environment in which, all boats had a chance to rise. We've just abandoned those. We are in the process, I think, of really backing away from those ideas.
Well, I think when you combine that with the ease with which a medium-sized power or even a small country can inflict major damage, right? The fact that you can essentially fight with robots. I mean, the Clone Wars, right? If you're a Star Wars fan, the Clone Wars are here. I mean, I had Dexter Filkins on and a couple weeks ago, and he was sounding the alarm about this change in warfare and just how, and of course, I've noticed over the last week or so, more people are noticing, hey, the Russia-Ukraine war is a drone war now. And this is the future of warfare. And, Ukraine and Russia are able to, what normally would be a reason to come to the negotiating table, you're running out of troops. You're running out of physical resources, human resources. If you don't need human resources to fight wars, you're more likely to fight wars.
Yeah. No, and again, in an environment where the U.S. is asserting its ability to, kill these suspected drug runners at sea with no due process whatsoever, it's tough. Political proposition, the politics are probably good for him. The long-term consequences of that for any idea that there are rules that govern our behavior, they weren't created for naive reasons. They weren't created because we all believed people were angels. Quite the opposite.
Right.
It's because we knew they weren't. And, they had their better angels that maybe coaxed out. Chuck, this week, it's part of this tragedy in some ways of Donald Trump, watching him at the UN ranting, I'll use that word, about immigration and excoriating all these nations for immigration is like refugee flows are a deep problem in the world right now.
Huge
and it's
problem.
not happening because people invited them in. It's happening because of war, instability, smartphones that help people navigate in ways they couldn't, communication we didn't have. There are all sorts of forces driving this. And the Refugee Convention, which dates to 1951, is totally out of date. Here is something the U.S. could lead on. This is, and Donald Trump is actually, by virtue of his politics, is particularly well equipped to provide that leadership, but it's just not going to happen. So how are we going to address this problem? you
Right.
know?
No, I mean, this is the problem. Like, we kind of all know what our problems are, what the role American leadership can play. But if the leader of America doesn't want to lead, what are you supposed to do?
Right. Right.
And that's, that for the life of me, he's always campaigning. He's never thinking about leading. He doesn't care if he's got a 50% job rating, let alone a 60%. I used to say, what made our 20th century politics work is that presidential incentives were to succeed, you had to be at a 60% approval. So you governed to get to 60, even if it meant you only won 50. But you always tried to govern a little bit above your party, and win over some people on the other side. And you were rewarded for it politically. We have, I've been quoting a lot of Milton Friedman lately, where he famously said, it's not about electing the right people. It's about having the right. Bad people will do good things if the incentives are aligned correctly. And this gets it to what we really need are better incentives, not better people.
But so to round out what you're saying about Trump, when you're saying he's always campaigning, then he's campaigning for his base because he has hacked our politics. Like he's understood. Go ahead.
That's what keeps him alive, right? That's what keeps him politically alive and politically powerful, right? How is it that he has tamed the Republicans in Congress? Because he's convinced them. I'll go back to a quote. I'll quote Tom Cole. I had a conversation with Tom Cole about this right after January 6th. Because he had Tom Cole's January 6th statement is the most incredible statement, because it was a fascinating attempt at walking a tightrope. He said, I'm not going to vote to certify the election because my constituents don't want me to. And I'm in a representative democracy. He did not say it was right or wrong. He just simply said, I'm doing this because my constituents have asked me. And I went to him and I said, you have, you got, I think it was in his district, he got 64% and Trump got 62. And Cole says to me, he goes, and if I oppose Trump, he's going to take his 62 and I'll keep my 2. And, now I love Tom. I've known him 30 years. You know what he was before he was a member of Congress or an elected official? He was a pollster. So the guy is a very, very much
your kind of guy.
Yeah. So, but unfortunately, I think he's thought, he didn't want to take the risk, right? That's essentially what he was telling me. Hey, it's too risky, and he's got control of the base, and that's what's broken about our politics, right? If you control the base of the party, you can control your party, even if a majority of the country doesn't want you. Like, think about this. You are the bureau chief in Jerusalem. So let me throw a question at you that I enjoy. It's more of a riddle, but did we export our politics to Israel, or did Israel export its politics to us? And here's how I frame it. Israel and the United States have the same issue. They've got a controversial leader that a majority of the public doesn't want as leader, but it's the only thing that majority agrees upon.
Yeah, I mean, it's a parliamentary system versus a republic, right? That we, the democracy that we have, it feels like now we have the weaknesses of a parliamentary system without its strengths. But you look at Israel and you can see a politician who's hacked the parliamentary system too, which is vulnerable in exactly the same way. I mean, I think, we've learned from each, I guess, who's learned from who. I think they've reciprocally influenced one another. I
just find it fascinating that Bibi is able to get stronger in his position, getting further away from the mainstream.
Yeah, again, he's had to do that, arguably, to hold his coalition together, and it's reflected something that's happened in Israeli politics, which is that it has moved right as the coalition, for some resolution, a peaceful resolution of this conflict has basically collapsed over the course of the last 25 years. But it's true, yeah. I mean, and it's interesting. It does it's similar in that you wind up within a system that's supposed to theoretically drive you towards majority resolution of problems. You wind up with kind of a minoritarian government, right? Which is,
Well, I think that's what we have right now.
yeah,
We haven't had, I mean, we've only had one president this century who's gotten over 50% of the vote.
Huh.
It was Obama twice, right?
That's
Nobody
a
else
shocking
has.
fact, isn't it? It's just, Trump got close this time, but he didn't make it. Yeah, yeah, it's really remarkable. And you're right, there's no longer the same incentive to aim for 60%.
And I don't know how to change, it's funny. The answer is we got to change our incentive structures. Okay, how do we do this? Right. It's easy to say. How do you do it? I mean, I think partisan primaries probably are, getting rid of those are probably an answer. But, just saying you want to get rid of partisan primaries doesn't mean it's going to happen overnight. And you got to basically change the rules in 50 different states to pull that off.
Yeah. Yeah, governors still have to campaign that way, right? I'm trying to think who within our system.
It's also the one place where voters still vote person over party. Right? How else do you explain a Larry Hogan in Maryland and a Laura Kelly in Kansas?
Right.
But nobody expected Larry Hogan to win a Senate seat, and I promise you, Laura Kelly's probably not winning a Senate seat in Kansas.
Right.
So we do see it there as voters, and that's why I do think. Now, here's something. Remember, I'm rambling here, but we had two of the most effective late 20th century presidents were both former governors, Reagan and Clinton, who both did strive for 60%ism.
Yeah. No accident. Right.
No. And then I always say the other president that had some success at being bipartisan was Eisenhower, who was from the military and kind of apolitical.
Yeah.
That's not an accident either, right? Our more partisan or polarizing presidents have been senators or Donald Trump.
Yeah. George H.W. Bush looks better and better in retrospect. Didn't win a second term.
Yeah. Because it turns out he wasn't a Reaganite. Right? Because the conservatives,
as they suspected all along, right?
They were right. Yeah, they were always right. He was not. He was a little close. He was in the Dewey wing of the party, I guess.
Right.
If you wanted to go backwards like that.
Yeah.
Or now we would call it the Bush wing of the party. There was a Bush wing and a Reagan wing, and they were two different wings.
And a true internationalist, at that moment when the wall was coming down, very concerned with, strengthening.
It's funny about H.W. Bush's presidency. I always thought that if Biden had modeled himself off of H.W. Bush, that was the presidency. That you can have a successful one term, if you kind of behave that way, and obviously Biden never did. But he had an opportunity to be the Democrats' version of that, and he just, perhaps it was just he was too late in his life to figure out how to do it.
And that mistake was what? Going too far left or
100%. Totally misunderstanding the 2020 mandate.
Yeah.
2020 election now, I really think it's pretty obvious that the 2020 election was voters saying, I want off the Trump roller coaster.
We knew that at the time.
Of course we did. We didn't
calm things down.
Please, I'm tired. I feel like I'm throwing up all the time. I just, get me off the roller coaster. And instead, somebody whispered in his ear that he could be FDR, and he did. I mean, the first 2 years of his presidency are just a colossal mistake. Just when you look back on it, it is just opportunity that he had to bring the country together, and he blew it.
Yeah,
he really did.
Yeah, he started inviting all those historians to the White House. Clinton did that too. And God knows we want to learn from history. But if the point is to figure out how do I compete with FDR and establish myself it feels like, again, you start creating some troubling incentives there. I don't know.
The minute you're trying to be more than one page in a history book as president is when you're going to blow it. Because then you're going to be more than one page, but for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah, overreach and hubris.
Who's the I'm curious, let's do a little bit of media landscape here in the last 10 minutes here. Who do you believe you're talking to when you write for the Lexington at the Economist? Who's your reader?
Um, who is our reader? I mean, we have a global readership. You know,
English language, the
well,
English language elite.
mostly English language, and yeah, I think that's fair to say. Increasingly, we're translating the stuff into other languages, and is one of the things that AI is going to allow us to do at greater scale, which is
That's
one
exciting.
of the good, exciting things, right?
Right. Like there is some exciting that comes with AI.
And by the way, not just text, but podcast, video, all that stuff. All of a sudden, there's a real opportunity to get, but in my view, is really high quality, reporting in front of a lot more people. So that's good. But I don't, it's a mix. We do a podcast, checks and balance, and do a reader questions periodically or listener questions periodically. And it's always thrilling to me to hear, like, there's a guy, he listens to the podcast when he's driving his tractor on his farm in Australia. Like, it's how he keeps in touch with his combine, in his cabin. It's how he keeps in touch with American politics a little bit. So for what I do, I guess I'm thinking about how, as you said, how do you, we have a very big readership in North America too. So it's a tricky thing. Like, how do you sound relevant enough to readers who are pretty steeped in our politics, but still, accessible to people who aren't.
Are you the first American that has done the Lexington, or has the Lexington always been written by somebody in America?
I am the first American. I don't think that's a good thing, actually. I mean, it's something they made an announcement about when I was grateful to get the gig. I think one of the strengths of the column has always been that it is written by an outsider.
Well, de Tocqueville understood us better than any American did.
Yeah,
I completely agree. Yeah.
For me, it's been a great opportunity to get some detachment, and my editors are fabulous, and they have they've kept their poise through this nutty period. And so it's, our internal editorial conversations are outside of the mosh pit, but I do think it's always been, a strength of the column. And we're not byline. The column is not byline. And my joke is I'm like the Dread Pirate Roberts. There's a different one of us But as an American, I've tried to work hard to honor that spirit, which is not just about funny spellings, which is also part of it. All those OUs and so forth.
That you can just let that's something that AI can fix. Hey, make this, put this in the form of the Economist. Fine. Every O will have a U after it now.
Yeah. But it is. I do try to think about that about a global audience when I'm writing.
That's what I was curious. Is it you're trying to explain America to the world, or explain the world to America?
Yeah. Well, at this time, Chuck, honestly, I'm out there trying to explain it to myself most of the time, I mean,
I know.
By the way,
I've been calling myself a political anthropologist, because I kind of feel more that way now than anything else. I'm trying to understand how these various American tribes interact with each other.
Which is why this should be a great time to be a journalist. Right?
Oh, I completely. In that sense, yes, I agree. Yeah,
this is why we got into the business. And if you're curious and you want to understand what's going on, there's been a lot going on that I don't understand, and so I try to use the column for that purpose. But
if you had more resources to cover America, where would you be focused, and what would you be focused on?
I would be spending a lot more time out in the country than I am. I'm trying to travel a fair amount. I haven't been able to the last couple of months. I've been in DC and New York too much, but I would, and it's a little hard when you're writing on a very regular pace to get out, spend the time you want to spend reporting. But this is where I've found my, the most value kind of, in my own work is just, I mean, it's such an obvious thing to say, but it's spending time in Texas and Florida and Ohio, and I haven't gotten to Alaska. I want to get to Alaska. It's and getting a better sense of how people are processing the national politics in their own lives. I don't know. How do you answer that question?
Well, I definitely think it's just more of everything outside of Washington and New York, right? Like I
So,
think this is, and unfortunately, legacy media is stuck shrinking, and so therefore they have fewer resources. So they're gonna, I feel like they're retreating from this. The upside of the substackification of journalism is that in theory, you've got people living in Kansas City or Lansing that are going to then try to start their own reporting outlets or their contributions. And I think I mean, because I do view journalism's problem as I do it. I view it through the prism of Craigslist, really, which was, as soon as we made classifieds free, we ended up gutting the foundation of journalism in America, which was local journalism. If you actually read de Tocqueville, he was fascinated by how fascinated we were by local politics. Well, why did
yeah.
that exist? Because every community had not one paper, every community had three papers, two papers, depending on some places, four papers, you might have a black newspaper, a Democratic newspaper, a Republican newspaper, and a Whig paper, or, something else. Right. And when we lost that local politics, it really, it gutted the foundation of journalism. So it's clear we have to go local. Now, I'm trying to see if there's a way to scale it. Is there a way to both incubate it and scale it and share some of the resources in order to get some of these locals to thrive? But ultimately, when we talk about our lost communities, right? That we've lost community. Well, one of the community glues used to be the local paper, and I'm not saying we can bring newspapers back. But if you unbundle the newspaper and think about all the different things the paper did for different aspects of the community, then you, as a publisher of a local information ecosystem, ought to be thinking about, how do I give something to every segment of my community so that they all come back to this one entity called the local paper, whether it's high school box scores or places to save money on groceries, or where the concerts are tonight, or micro forecasting, because you have the tools to do this. We know it's going to, rain harder in this zip code than it is in this zip code. And oh, by the way, your city, here's who's corrupt on your city council.
I could not agree more. I just think, and it's a hard story to tell because it's a story, as we'd say, about a dog that's not barking, right? It's about something that's gone away. But when you think about the devastation at the local level, the wipeout, and many of them are ghost newspaper, the ones that are left are barely staffed. People aren't able to go out into the streets and interview anybody. The stories of corruption, the potholes that aren't getting filled, the stories that just make you empathize with your neighbor because of what they're going through. All that's gone. There's some really good experiments out there. But
right.
Chuck, one thing
but
that
it's
drives
journalism for journalists. That's my biggest complaint.
which is
Most of the local experiments are journalism for journalists.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean by that?
Do you mean that there's too much media coverage, or
no? It's more of, they're covering stories of marginalized communities, but they're not.
Yeah. Oh, you
but
mean
they're
the
not
prize driven? Yeah.
Yes,
The justice stuff or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
They're all,
yeah.
as a friend of mine says, they all got drunk watching Woodward and Bernstein, and All the President's Men, and
well, that's a curse of our business generally right now. I think it has been for many years. Yeah, you're totally right. Sorry, I misunderstood what you were saying.
Yeah.
And the other thing, what drives me crazy, Chuck, and you and I have spent a lot of time covering White Houses, and I'm not faulting anybody for doing that. Mm-hmm. But you look at the images from the White House briefing room,
I know.
You would not imagine this was an industry in existential crisis, with any kind of resource constraints. That room is more packed than it has ever been, right? And I even when that is not. You're not learning a lot in the way. I mean, again, I'm not faulting anybody. I've done the work.
No, but this goes to this. I always say, the problem with journalism in America, there's too many journalists in Washington and not enough in America.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Look, I benefited from that. I always joke. I mean, I didn't start local. I started at the hotline. I was able to shortcut my way. I didn't have to go to the city hall beat, to the state house beat. And, there are times that I think that I regret I didn't have that route. Then again, I got to where I got without that route. But maybe it's because I was benefiting from a system that was atrophying at the time, which it was, right? Newspapers were consolidating in the 90s. Local political reporters are getting laid off left and right. And so the people doing politics were all in Washington.
Yeah. Although, yeah, you could still have a good business at the local level, and there were still a lot of good local newspapers, many family owned still. There wasn't, but the consolidation was underway. The hard part of it is it's not bad faith. It's business and technology, the incentives of our business. And that period we were talking about earlier, which now to me looks like a golden age, people might disagree, but the rise of objectivity and all of that was driven by, I cited propaganda and journalists coming together to try to do better, which is true, but it was really about business and technology. You're able to reach a mass audience for the first time in the late 19th century with the invention of the rotary press and radio and television. All of a sudden, what had been a subscriber business became an advertising-based business. When you're running a big advertising business at scale, you don't want to alienate by your readers.
You want to be broad.
You want to be broad.
Yeah.
Right. So that meant just the facts. It meant a wide range of opinion. If you're going to do opinion, it meant separating news and opinion so you could be trusted. All of that was collapsed by the internet, and now you can build a really successful business serving a niche, what it wants to hear. And if you're going to build a subscriber business, by the way, best way to hold on to your subscribers, reassure them you see the world the way they do. And that's
you were a victim of that. I felt, and frankly, I had a show on a cable channel that we had to move because the audience was just we weren't ideologically aligned.
How did you hear that from the audience? Can I ask you that? Like, what was that feedback loop like?
It was all negativity and
just hate.
It was just hate. How dare you put a Republican on?
Yeah.
That sort of thing. No, look, I didn't want to spend our time talking about your manifesto, but your manifesto, I could have changed out the name of your organization and put the name of my organization in, and it would have read very similarly.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Chuck.
And it just was like, you sort of knew and now everybody sees it, by the way.
Yeah.
Right. Like everybody now has a much clearer picture of what you were going through at the time. I think what I went through in different ways, what some of us were going through. I mean, I think we got to this moment this week. I always say there were two, when you think about the Jimmy Kimmel situation, there's sort of two original sins here. Original sin one was bullying the social media companies to deplatform Trump.
Mm-hmm.
It is literally the Biff gets the gambling book in Back to the Future 2 moment. I mean, if I could go back and change that moment, and he stays on Twitter, I think he punches himself. I think what Mitch McConnell was betting on, right? We all know Mitch McConnell was betting on Trump was going to punch himself out, and people were going to tire of it and move on. Except we kicked him out of the mainstream. So if people saw those Truth Social posts on a consistent basis in 2021 through 2024, I don't think he's the nominee of the Republican Party.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the second original sin was Iger paying off the George Stephanopoulos lawsuit. Like that triggered everything that we've been dealing with over the last 9 months.
Then other people start folding too, and
because ABC folded, right? It took one to cave, and the minute they got one to cave, and then all of a sudden everybody lost whatever was remaining in people's spines collapsed.
Yeah, I was thinking about this when you were talking about the Tom Cole example. What you need is people who are willing to say, and by the way, I was okay with losing because it mattered.
That's right.
And I cared about public service. I cared about I disagreed. My constituents so I led my constituents. Rather than I just did what they wanted me to do, which is a way to try to make the compromise.
Well, it's Liz Cheney versus Tom Cole. Right. It's Liz Cheney versus Tom Cole in that sense.
Yeah. And that's how you wind up with very few Liz Cheneys, and they wind up where she is. And that's how you get this cascade of kind of cowardice, really. And Yeah, the media thing, Chuck. The thing about it, like I think you and I both we were acting in accordance with what we saw as our journalistic principles and what was good journalism.
Yeah, and we were
And I,
products of the 80s and 90s. I'm not going to
yeah,
lie. I know I
but
was,
I still
but I
think
believe in it.
I
Yeah.
believe in it too. I think we were
Yeah.
right. But the thing is, even for the activists coming after us, not this is not my problem to think about, but it was stupid politics too. You know, it was bad journalism and stupid politics, and it empowered Donald. It empowered exactly the phenomenon they said they were so freaked out about.
Right. You don't get an extremist unless you keep the extremist from having a say. You know,
Or
one
if
of
you
the
treat
things,
everybody on the other side as an extremist, like you
right.
said, you can't have a Republican on. Like, really, we're living in a country where you can't hear from a member of the other. You know,
How dare you platform this
yeah,
person? And you're just
yeah,
like,
yeah.
I mean, and that was the craziness about January 6th. Nobody told me I shouldn't interview the president of Iran, but I was told I shouldn't put on Kevin McCarthy because he didn't certify January 6th. Seriously?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that's, I mean, at the New York Times, I could publish Vladimir Putin. You know, I could publish,
But not Tom Cotton.
I could publish, and I
Yeah.
did. This is
Right.
one I wrote. I mean, a Taliban leader, but Tom Cotton was beyond the pale, you know?
Yeah.
And again, I mean, febrile moments and people are, but, you know, we as journalists, it's in those times that we particularly like, we owe it to people to keep our heads.
Are you jealous of, some people may not know that your brother is Michael Bennet, the senator who wants to run for governor. Are you jealous that he's leaving the Acela corridor?
I am envious that he gets to spend all that time in Colorado. You know,
I had a senator, I'm going to leave the name out of it, who's just crestfallen that he's running for governor. Always wanted him to replace Schumer. And now they don't know who the best person is to replace Schumer. There's a real movement to try. Schumer would be gone if there was an obvious answer. And there's plenty of Democratic senators that just know that he's punched out, right? We can, you know, it doesn't matter what you think, whether Schumer was once good at this, whatever. You know, when somebody, you know when Joe Flacco shouldn't be your starting quarterback anymore. It doesn't mean he didn't win you a Super Bowl once. But your brother was the consensus candidate, and now there's no consensus candidate.
Huh. I don't know how to respond to that. It's nice to hear nice things said about one's brother.
I hear you. Look, I don't want to. I put you on the spot, and I
don't write about Colorado or about him. I have a real. I mean, he is a conflict for me. He's my brother, and
you know, I think sometimes we make too. You know, it's like I feel like you two have always handled that very professionally.
Thanks.
And I don't know why that's so difficult for some other entities in our business. For what it's worth. On that front. Let me close.
But the Senate, like these, you know, oh, sorry.
Yeah. Please. No, go ahead. No, what were you going to say about the Senate?
I mean, again, not speaking about him or his
right.
politics.
I'm going to leave that out.
It's just like these there are a lot of people leaving the Senate right now. You know,
I don't blame them. I don't blame them. And Lisa Murkowski's apparently thinking about running for governor. I don't blame her.
Yeah.
Right. You've already got at least 3 senators, Marsha Blackburn, your brother, Tommy Tuberville. Yeah. So you might add Lisa Murkowski to that. You can't get anything done in the Senate. And even if you're a committee chair, only 2 people matter in the Senate, John Thune and Chuck Schumer. And that's the problem. They control the floor. They control amendments. They control, and it is, you know, this goes back to the dysfunctional Congress where, you know, we grew up at an era where committee chairs mattered. You know, Chuck Grassley and Max Baucus would never have allowed any tariff policy that looks like today get through the Senate back in the 80s and 90s. Just wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. 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 In the House, too. I mean, there were giants, you know, as committee chairs, like the Dan Rostenkowskis of this world.
The committee chairs were taken seriously. Well, if the bill can get through committee, then it's got to be brought to the floor.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a different model of leadership that we've really moved away from, you know, a more distributed model in both chambers. And it hasn't made our politics more efficient.
No. And this is why, I mean, I sort of joke, out of the 535 elected members of Congress, we only have 4 that do anything, and the other 531 are elected pundits if they choose to be. I mean, look at
Yeah.
Ted Cruz. He has a weekly podcast.
Yeah.
Should he have that much time?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, he does. That's the thing. Like, he has that much. This is like, it's not like he's not doing his job, right? What is there to do?
Although he used it for good last week when he came out and criticized the rare Republican, saying, I thought when he criticized the administration over the Jimmy Kimmel situation, he showed refreshing consistency, I thought.
Well, this is where I think that Trump is actually acquiring a lot of, I don't think people realize that, with tariffs, he's quietly got Republicans upset with him in the Midwest, right? Your Grassley's, your Jerry Moran's, the farm states. On free speech, now it's got Ted Cruz and David McCormick sided with him on the extrajudicial killings of the boats in Venezuela, Rand Paul, right? Like, that's how coalitions break apart. And he's thrown so many different things at, his coalition is not, they're basically united on culture, and that's it. But he's cracking it himself by his sort of sloppy implementation of these various ideas.
Yeah. And which is one of the big questions as we start looking ahead to 2020, and God knows what kind of state the country's going to be in and all the rest of it. But if, is there another figure that can hold this really pretty incoherent, set of policies and impulses and emotions and grievances together the way he has?
History shows no. I mean, we just talked about Bush 41, right? He couldn't hold together Reagan's coalition for arguably more than 2 years. Al Gore couldn't even do it for one election.
Yeah.
Joe Biden basically got to the presidency on the fumes of the Obama coalition, right? That didn't hold together. I would argue that in the TV era, the successful presidents have all been cults of personality in some form, right? Eisenhower, Kennedy, Nixon, Reagan, Clinton, even Obama, Trump. And the failures have been the ones that couldn't be cults of personalities. Carter, Bush 41, Biden, Johnson, right? Like, the ones that didn't know how to, for one reason or the other.
Yeah. And it's becoming a cultural figure as much as a political one in a sense, and that's where I feel, and again, one of the great failures of it just seems crazy in retrospect, how little he communicated with the American people, as opposed to this always on presidency that we now have. And I feel like that's just the world we're going to be living in, that to succeed politically, you have to dominate attention the way Donald Trump does.
It's what Gavin Newsom is banking on now, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm a skeptic, but I always say I'm a skeptic, but I have an open mind on these things. Like, you never know what works in America until you see it happen. But, it is interesting to watch Newsom try to basically do the Trump thing and have more success. He's having more success at it than I expected.
Yeah, me too.
Well, all right. Do you guys publish every week or is it every other week? It feels like every week.
We're every day, Chuck. It's like everybody else, but they call it a paper, by the way, not a magazine. They got a different word for everything.
Well, Brits. It's thinner than magazine paper,
but we publish weekly. My column comes out weekly.
Hey, is David Bradley's dream of the Atlantic becoming a competitor to the Economist actually come true? Do you view them as a direct competitor now?
I don't think you'd have to ask my boss that question. I think she would say,
or a Semaphore.
Yeah,
more
I mean, everybody competes with Semaphore. Definitely, right? Wants to be kind of a global digital publication, reaching an audience much like we do. And we are in a competition of all against all for attention. Yeah, I think there is a lot of overlap. I mean, having been worked with you at the Atlantic back in the day, its DNA is so fundamentally American, and it remains that way today.
But you remember, that North Star for David was always The Economist. That was his North Star, not the New Yorker. That's what people don't realize. Yeah.
But The Economist was founded by that collective of writers back in the 1850s to promote the American idea. That was the whole concept. And I think they're doing an awesome job of that, actually, to this day. But that's a different role than the Economist has. So I think that creates some meaningful differentiation.
I miss you, my friend.
Yeah.
I miss you in a newsroom, miss collaborating with you, but
Yeah.
I am thankful you're writing that column every week.
Thanks, Chuck. I'm glad you're doing. You're still in the fight the way you are.
You
It's
are
wonderful
too.
to
I
be
mean,
with you. Yeah.
it's it's no fun to just sit back and watch, right?
No, and it's far from over.
Oh, yeah, that's for sure. All right, brother. Be well. Thanks,
Great
James.
to see you.